I was the main developer of this Hypogeum project. My main area of expertise circle around the areas of programming and game development. The idea of the Hypogeum project was conceived primarily with an earlier project, really and truly, that of the St. Paul's Catacombs. We wanted to actually apply a similar experience that we had done with that project, with the Hypogeum, the Saflieni Hypogeum, which is known as a World Heritage Site. Therefore, broadening the scope of people who actually can visit the Hypogeum. That was one of the main goals of the project initially. The project was primarily designed in order to increase the accessibility with visitors. The idea behind it was so that more people would be able to visit this site, which is very, very temperamental and very, very fragile as an environment. But in a virtual way. So, if one actually had to go to visit the Hypogeum itself, there are a lot of barriers and there are a lot of areas where visitors are not allowed in order to explore. Therefore, the idea behind this was so that people would be able to explore even more of the Hypogeum itself, and therefore get a better understanding and knowledge of the area of the site itself. The project started off with a laser scanned 3D model of the Hypogeum itself, which was given to us by Heritage Malta. Now, this was captured using laser scanning technology, which basically takes a point in 3D space every 3 millimeter, where every point is basically 3 millimeters apart from each and every other point, which means that you've got a very high detailed mesh. This was in turn simplified by Heritage Malta themselves, or the contractors that Heritage Malta employed at the time. And this 3D model was then brought into the game engine Unity, which is where my work started, essentially. The problem with doing this kind of technique is that 3D models generated using this methodology usually have only one face, i.e. the face that is facing the laser scanner. But then again, some faces could be pointing in the opposite direction. This is one of the main headaches that I had in this project. In fact, the 3D model itself was had around about 3 million different facets, 3 million triangles, if you will, if not more. And some of them were literally facing the wrong direction. So they were facing away from the camera, if you will. And game engines in general, not just Unity, use a technique which is known as Occlusion Culling, which basically says that any triangle that is not facing the direction of the camera is just not drawn. So basically you end up with a lot of big holes here and there. So one of the first things that we actually had to do was reverse these triangles. Now, given the size of the 3D model itself, this was pretty problematic. Once that was done, we then started playing around with textures. We played around with light maps and height maps. Basically, light maps allow the surface to react naturally with light that happens to fall upon that surface, and height maps actually make the surface more three-dimensional. It actually creates these bumps, if you will, in the 3D surface itself. Once that was done, I had to play around with navigation. since the original idea was to actually create a virtual reality experience, one actually had to come up with a way of interacting or creating an interaction space which was A, easy to use, and B, quite intuitive, so that one could actually navigate the virtual environment. In order to do that, we made use of the Oculus's controllers. The controls are very, very simple. One hand literally controls forward and backward movement, and the other controls pivoting motions. And you basically navigate by looking in a particular direction, and if you push forward in that particular direction, you're always traveling in the direction that you're facing, whilst also giving the ability to the user to be able to pivot around themselves so that they don't have to physically turn 360 degrees in order to explore the space. That also provided other challenges, such as the idea of virtual sickness. Basically, this comes about because people are sensing that they are moving via their eyes, but they are not sensing that they are moving via their inner ear. Their inner ear is telling them that they are stationary, whereas the eyes are telling the person that they're actually moving. This conflicting signal actually gives the user this sensation of sickness, very similar to seasickness. And one way that we could actually mitigate a lot of this was through the use of slow movements. Another thing that we also introduced was the idea of sunlight. There was a theory that was published also by Heritage Malta way back when, that used to say that in ancient times, the light used to actually seep through from the upper layer all the way through to the Holy of Holies with a direct beam of light, essentially. This was also due to the fact that the upper layer was at one point exposed to the elements, not as it is right now, buried underneath houses that have been built up along the millennia. This was actually tested out. We actually placed an artificial sun. We've oriented the 3D model so that it is exactly as one would actually find it in real life. We orientated the sun in a similar way. We've also plugged in values for time of day, day of year, and so on and so forth. And what we realized is that when we plugged in the dates of the solstices and the equinoxes, which are basically the extremes as to where the sun is at any given point in time in the sky, it resulted that the sun never actually does physically travel all the way through into the Holy of Holies as was previously hypothesized. However, more work can actually be done. We basically said that no direct sunlight actually penetrated into the Holy of Holies, but that doesn't negate the possibility of having indirect sunlight, so light bounces. But that is something that is currently being worked upon various other iterations of the Hypogeum project. Something else that we encountered was that since the 2D model itself was captured using this laser scanning equipment, the laser scanning equipment itself is quite bulky, and therefore couldn't actually fit into every nook and cranny within the Hypogeum itself. Therefore, what happened was that there were a number of voids, if you will, holes in the basic 3D model itself. One thing that was actually needed to be included into this Hypogeum model itself was basically rocks of similar diegetic field, so that we could actually plug these voids up, thus keeping the immersion as high as possible to anybody who actually visits or experiences this virtual reality experience.